Leo, first of all, I'd like to ask you about your background, your education. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. Grew up in a little town named Rocky Ford, Colorado, born in 1930. Attended University of Colorado, both in terms of undergraduate degree and master's, after a little time in Germany in the Army. PhD, 1961, University of Missouri. Then went to the University of North Dakota for 3 years and came to the University of Wyoming in 1964. Left the university in 1989, been in private practice for the last 24 years.
Okay, in private practice doing what?
Counseling psychologist.
Okay. You have been working with UFO abductees. You've been doing things like past life therapy, things of that nature. Wasn't there a time in your life when you were a skeptic about those sorts of things?
Oh yes, when I grew up, I wanted to be a, quote, scientist, end quote, which, meant in those days left brain, masculine, scientific, technical. In fact, at one point in my career, I was praying every day to be a better scientist. And I thought that meant to increase my ability to deal with technical matters. But what happened was that I kept getting more and more images of clients. For example, a young woman came in to the University Counseling Center at the University of Wyoming, and she was anxious, and she said she was having trouble studying. So I said, well, let's practice self-hypnosis. I started teaching self-hypnosis in the 60s, and then a class in 1969-70 for 13 years, until it was canceled by the university officials. She said, why should we learn self-hypnosis? I said, well, it'll help us relax, and maybe we'll find out why we're having trouble being so anxious. So she said, okay. So I leaned back. She said, are you going to do this too? And I said, oh, sure, you're not the only one who's going to get this benefit. We relaxed for 20 minutes or so, came back to the normal state. She said, wow, that felt good. And I said, yes. And then I said, tell me, do you have a pet dog or a pet cat with white fur and pointy ears? Ah! She started to sob. Took her a few minutes to regain her composure. She said, how did you know about my pet rat? Well, I'd had a little image in my mind that I didn't know what it was. So I asked her about it. I began to realize later on that she was, at the subconscious level, allowing me to find out about her pet rat. And I was allowing myself to use that information. She had grown up in Kansas. Her parents had told her one day that summer before she came to Wyoming that they were going to town, and if she wanted to come with them, she had to come right now. She stuffs her pet rat into the cage. A thunderstorm and rain soaked the rat. It got sick and died, and so she didn't want to tell anybody about that consciously, but she did want to talk about it subconsciously. So just as many good psychologists and psychiatrists and other people have learned, we communicate at various levels, and the communication with many clients is just as important at the subconscious level or the psychic level as it is at the conscious level. And of course that's true in many of our discussions of communication.
Mm-hmm. You also would be aware of what someone like Michael Shermer would say about that. What would Michael Shermer say about that experience?
He would attribute it to something else, coincidence or whatever. This book, Psychic Intuition, by Nancy de Troutre, however it's pronounced in French. She's an attorney, trained psychic detective, a medium, and she has a nice book about ESP, everything you want to ask but we're afraid to know. And she takes the reader through a series of topics and evidence which leads her to the conclusion that some people are unable to experience ESP as well as to talk about it. And other people, most everybody, experiences it all the time, but they may or may not talk about their psychic intuition. Carl Jung had a nice model. He argued that we gather information by our senses, thinking, our touching, feeling, touching, sensing, smelling, seeing, hearing, and then we evaluate it by thinking about what our senses have brought to our awareness. She quotes the studies. I don't really understand how these scientists have done it, but some scientists say that we gather 11 or 12 billion bits of information every second. I'm looking over at Stan, and we gather a lot of information, but we only process 15 or 16 bits of information a second. So there's a little bit of information our senses are, through our thinking, are processing, whereas there's a huge amount of information that we're gathering every second. Well, there's also the idea that our intuition is gathering information, and we process it by feeling. And those of us who are male and intelligent and educated, we don't trust our goddamn feelings. But we do trust our thinking! And so when we think about what we are sensing, we are male and we are scientific and we are true, we are right. But when we start allowing our feelings, trouble. I can remember one time when I was lying down during the noon hour at the university. I was interested in reincarnation. I was studying what the various experts had said. Meryl and I later did reincarnation workshops, and she was very good at it. She was better at it than I was. But what I wanted to do that particular day was make sure that I had proof of reincarnation. And there's some people who have gone back to what seemed to be previous lives and have gone to certain places, and records have been discovered that shows to any reasonable mind that reincarnation is so. But of course there are some minds that are not reasonable. They're reasoning, but not reasonable. Anyway, that particular day I said to myself, I want to make sure that I get information that is proof of reincarnation. Because I'd had several lifetimes as, Roman warrior, woman in South America who wanted to read and write. Men, only the priest in that culture could read and write, and women weren't allowed to read and write. Other lifetimes that seemed to be meaningful to me, but I just wasn't sure. So that day I relaxed deeply, and I see sagebrush. Well, sagebrush in Wyoming isn't all that interesting. And so I said, well, maybe I'm not going to get anything today. And I said, Leo, that's resistance. Stay with it. So I stayed with it. Pretty soon, I was a Native American. I was on a horse, Grand Maine. I was after this buffalo. We go up the hill. The buffalo falls back. Everything goes blank. I thought, well, I must have died. But no. I stood up. I heard yells. I turned my friends with fierce painted faces. The kid got a buffalo. But my pony was dead. And every time I tell the story, I weep. And that was my proof. Feelings are evidence as much as names and numbers and a bank account and so forth. Things that we regard as evidence. So, Jung's model, in my opinion, is a good model because some societies emphasize gathering information by sensing and evaluating information by thinking. But some societies allow, mostly feminine societies, allow intuition to gather information and to process or evaluate information by feeling. In my opinion, the good person, the good human, does both. And in my opinion, Nancy is able to be both masculine and intellectual, and feminine and compassionate.
Leo, you talked about the experience with initially with visualizing the pet rat of the student that came to you, and you helped her with the self-hypnosis. Clearly, there were other experiences after that led you to the conclusion that there really is something to this, including. And what do you feel the evidence is for the existence of a human soul?
I think that looking into the mirror and seeing one's eyes is a good lesson, not only in learning about our soul, but also learning about ourselves as ET, extraterrestrial. The evidence for soul from a, quote, scientific viewpoint is best illustrated, I think, by some studies. I can't recall who did these studies. They have a person who is dying on a platform, and then at the moment of death, there's just a little bit of difference in the weight. The soul had a couple of grams or something, 3 or 4 grams. There are a variety of topics, a variety, whether it's out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, that have been shown to give information that is acceptable at the physical level for scientists. You know, Dr. Michael Sabom, he's an MD. He's done studies of people who were cardiac patients. One woman, for example, described out-of-body experience while the physicians were doing surgery, and she wanders around and she finds some red shoes on the ledge, and she talks afterwards about those, and people go out and see the red shoes. All kinds of evidence indicating that people do have out-of-body experiences. If people want hard-nosed stuff in terms of remote viewing rather than, quote, clairvoyance, well, then the Army work, there have been several authors who have described their studies of remote viewing, showing that people can get information at a distance of location and people and so on. Telepathic stuff. Rupert Sheldrake, he's got an interesting book. What's it called? Something about science. Maybe I'll think of the name in a moment. He shows a variety of studies, including dogs sitting, and then they get up and they go to the door. When their master or owner or guardian downtown London has decided, with the help of the interviewer, when to return home. Because people say, oh, well, the dog expects the owner to come home at 5 o'clock, so that's why. No, they take a table of random numbers, and they decide when to start returning home, and at the moment that it's decided that the guardian is coming home, little Fido gets up and goes to the door. So the evidence is, quote, overwhelming, unquote, if one wants to look at all the evidence, that not only is consciousness an important part of what we think of as science, or what we think of as physics, or what we think of as the universe. In my opinion, consciousness is everything. Yeehaw.
Have you heard of something called instrumental transcommunication?
Yeah. What's his name? I spoke.
Gary Schwartz, is that the guy you're thinking of?
Yeah, there's also a guy in Denver.
Mark Macy.
Mark Macy, yeah. Thank you. I sat while he talked about his work, and right now I'm drawing a blank as to the kinds of procedures that he followed. But once again, the interaction of what we think of as human intelligence and what we think of animal or what we think of as robot, or what we think of as cameras or anything else. We saw just before we started this interview the interaction that Richard had with the batteries. I don't think we know fully what our thoughts can do, but our intention is meaningful. In fact, the modern physicists have been doing these kind of studies for 100 years, and yet my colleagues who call themselves physicists are not so sure about what does it mean to have an intent, and how does that intent impact the world around us. I myself am intrigued with what's called Ho'oponopono. A guy named Joe Vitale, if we were in Italy, I suppose it'd be Vitale. He wrote a book called Zero Limits, and he describes the work of Dr. I. Hugh Lin. He's a PhD psychologist, Japanese-American, hired by the state of Hawaii to work with criminally insane prisoners. And he was in this ward, and he would pick up the chart, he'd look at the picture and the resume of a rapist or a killer, and he would say to the universe, I love you, I'm so sorry, please forgive me, thank you. I love you, I'm so sorry, please forgive me, thank you. What he was doing was accounting for his own perception. He claims that he's responsible for his perception. If he perceives somebody as a rapist, that's his perception. In our society, we tend to think that our deeds, what we do, that's our responsibility. If I step on Stan's toe and break it, Richard said, hey, Leo, pay for the medical bill. You stepped on Stan's toe. So I'm responsible for my deeds. Well, Dr. Hugh Lin says he's responsible for his perception. And so he clears himself of evil or nasty or grieving or sad thoughts through Ho'oponopono. The marvelous thing about the story is that people who were there in the ward say that after 3 or 4 months, medication went down, shackles came off, staff would come to work because they were no longer threatened or attacked. After 4 or 5 years, the ward was closed. Still some common prisoners, but they're no longer criminally insane. So they're just sent off to other prisons. What this tells us is, if that's true and it can be replicated, then our own thoughts, our own intentions, not only are significant for ourselves, they're significant for everybody around us.
In the book that you were talking about, the Harvard-trained neurosurgeon that wrote Proof of Heaven, I believe he indicates in his book that he had always been under the impression, as a Harvard-trained neurosurgeon, that consciousness was the result of chemistry and biochemistry. But after his experience with spinal meningitis, that left him in a near-death state, that he realized during his experience there that it was the other way around.
Yeah.
Is that what is your impression of
yes.
that?
He was told afterwards, and his family were told, that his brain function was closed down, and according to the story, the physicians were considering ending life support. And he opens his eyes and he talks about his experience through the realm of heaven, guided by a female. Later, he acknowledged that she was his biological sister that he had not known growing up. They'd been adopted. And there's a difference in what I read in the review and what I read in the book. There were 3 messages. You are loved and cherished. You are eternal. You can do no wrong. That's one there was a little difference in you are eternal and you are something else. But the messages are beautiful because it says at the soul level, we are perfect. At the human level, it ain't quite that correct. So if it's true that we are conscious beings who happen to be in these bodies, then, like my wife says, it's all theater. We come into these bodies. I don't know why I chose this costume, but we come into these bodies. If we have scripts that agree with other people's scripts, it's a comedy, hee-haw. If it's scripts that disagree with other people, it's a tragedy, boo-hoo. And then at the end, we take our bows and say, well, shall we try it again? And so life after life, we are here to learn lessons. And the fastest way to learn is L-O-V-E. Love is the energy of the universe. Whether we call it consciousness, whether we call it love, whether we call it energy, this energy is what it's all about. And when we become aware that not only is this energy the stuff of the universe, but also if we become aware that we can glom onto it. Some people talk about riding the surf, the surfers of the Zuvaya, so that we don't fall into other people or hurt other people by pushing into their system of love. On the other hand, we don't fall back off the wave and pull away from other people because we're afraid of other people's systems of energy and love. If we can ride the wave, we experience so much fun and so much pleasure in life. And if other people around us do the same thing, that's it.
A friend of mine, Dr. Stanislav Ojak.
Yeehaw! I've heard of
it. He would say that that in the reincarnation paradigm that we're talking about, that there would be a time when it would no longer be necessary to assume a physical being similar to what we are experiencing now. Is that your feeling?
That's my understanding. For example, there's a book, Human by Day, Zeta by Night, by Judy Carroll. She's an Australian writer. My other book, where she's describing actually what happened, is loaned out right now. But in this book, which is like a novel, she quotes the statements of Zetas, ETs, and they say things that are similar to what religious prophets and teachers have said for thousands of years. On a scale of 1 to 10, we'd be at scale 1, and we're supposedly, according to many observers, getting ready to move into a level 2. The shift in consciousness is occurring. The Mayan calendar shows the end of 2012, and now we're starting on a new world or a new age. And I have a little story about that. So these observers and these prophecies would indicate that we move up to level 2. We're still in need of the human body to learn, but we have a better chance at learning quickly rather than through many, many lifetimes. As we progress up the scale, this paradigm would indicate that you get up to 3 or 4, no need to have a human body. It can be like an angel or a celestial being who can interact without necessarily using the human body. I like this model because it would indicate that just as an educational model, we move from being pupils to being students. When kids are in elementary school, they need a teacher to guide them, maybe many teachers. As we get older, we have many people who consult us, but when we get to be college students or graduate students, we can learn ourselves. We know where to go look for the information. I can remember when I was a 7th grader, we had a new science teacher. She was young and attractive, and she had a marvelous idea. She said, now, children, there are two ways of getting information. One is to remember. Another is to know where to go look. And I thought, wow, that means I don't have to remember everything in every book. I can have a book and I can go look it up. And that is a marvelous concept. And so the Akashic records serve in that capacity, according to many people, that we don't have to remember all of our past lives, detail. We can go look for the information we need. And if we continue on our path of intent and on our path of love, we're moving up, and everybody else is moving up. Yeehaw.
Would you agree that, I told you the story earlier about Jan Harzan and his interaction with Ben Rich, and all points in space are connected, and he connected that with ESP, which clearly connects interstellar space travel with consciousness. Would you agree that that with the idea that all points in space are connected?
Yes, and I think not only with space, but also with time. To me, the interaction of space and time is what makes interstellar or interdimensional travel possible. We humans tend to think of space as travel from this point to that point. But there's also time involved. And this is what we apparently are learning from the ETs, that it's space-time travel, not just space travel. And some have models, and I don't understand them from a physical point of view, but saying that the time can be used to bridge space. And so instead of 3 or 4 years to get from one star to another, it's zoom. And I don't understand that, but this is what I'm hearing from people who I respect for their intellect and their awareness. And Ben Rich seems to be someone who says we've already accomplished that. We, meaning those people who don't talk about what they've already accomplished.
Would you agree with the notion that, are you familiar with the holographic theory of the universe? Have you ever heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
I believe in the holographic theory of the universe, virtually every particle in the universe, no matter how minute, is inherently conscious in and of itself, that everything is conscious.
And each point is the center of the universe. And we humans believe that almost automatically. Yeah, the holographic universe, one title of book, there's the conscious universe. There are a variety of people who have written from their perspective about the connection of consciousness and what we think of as physical reality. And of course, the various scientists point out that our view of the universe is from a small part of the electromagnetic spectrum. We only hear a certain amount. Dogs hear more than we do. Bats hear more than we do. We only see certain things. Beyond that, the ultraviolet and the infrared range, there is so much more in the universe than what we are able to perceive. So not only should we be diligent in our study, we should be humble in our attitude about who we are. You spent
a majority of your time, well, a lot of your time in the last several decades, exploring phenomenon that one would consider, would call perhaps paranormal, with respect to extraterrestrials, consciousness, the soul, ghosts, and things of that nature. Do you think that modern science is looking into those subjects enough, or do we just lack the tools to be able to look at those things in an objective
way? We don't lack tools. We don't lack money. We lack will. I can remember one time talking to a group of scientists out in California. We were talking about UFO experiences, and I told about mine. And one physicist, he looked at me and he said, well, if I had a UFO sighting or an ET encounter, I wouldn't report it, Leo. And I said, why not? He said, I have to think about my he didn't say reputation, what did he call it? My credibility. And I didn't say anything, but I thought, well, what about your integrity? It was the opposite of what I heard from a young man who looked at me and he said, wow, you're really courageous. And I said, no, I don't think so. I'm just on a good path. Yeah, but he said, doesn't being ridiculed bother you? And I said, well, there are some scientists who say that any new science goes through 3 stages. First it's ignored, then it's ridiculed, and then it's accepted. I said, we've been ignored, now we're being ridiculed. We're making progress. He laughed like, oh, that's progress, being ridiculed.
Would you say that your experience with the extraterrestrial issue has led you to any conclusions about the nature of the civilizations that might be visiting us in terms of their level of technology? In other words, are we looking at visitors who are just like us, or are we looking at some visitors who may be just like us, and we're dealing with civilizations on many different levels of technology?
I think so, many different civilizations. The big question is, are they in cahoots? Are they connected? Or are they separate? When I was first starting out in the 60s, the big question was about whether flying saucers are, quote, real, unquote, or are they fiction. So the game was being played between 2 players, the believers and the skeptics. The skeptics were intelligent, educated, male, and reasonable. The believers, we were silly and, fuzzy-minded. We didn't know cloud formations and blah, blah, blah. Well, then the game changed because we found out that some of the skeptics were debunkers. They already knew that flying saucers could not exist. And then we found out that some of the believers were knowers. We had been on board a craft. We knew that there were ETs. And so the game changed again when people started talking, well, okay, so there are different kinds of humans and different kind of reactions to the UFO phenomena. What about the purpose? Aha, now, good guy, bad guy was one scenario. There are good ETs and there are bad ETs, like the British and the French, and we're the Indians who are being pushed around by the various colonies. This book, Anunnaki, Gods No More, by Lesson, he takes the work of Sitchin, and Zachariah Sitchin, who was born in Russia, raised in England, and was one of the few people who could study the ancient Sumerian texts. This history, several books, indicated that we not only came from the stars, we were created by the ETs. The ETs needed workers in the gold mines, and so they created us to have short, brutish lives, worked by the sweat of the brow, according to the biblical inscription. So we were seen as not only their workers, but they were our creators. If it's true that that's where we came from, the other question is, are we, meaning human on the planet Earth now, the only source from the Anunnaki and from the planet Nibiru or Marduk? Or are there other civilizations, Arcturian, Pleiadian? Up here is a picture of the Pleiadians, and according to some people, that's where I came from. Okay, I knew as a child, sitting on a little chicken coop in Rocky Ford, Colorado. I looked up in the southwest sky, and I said, my family is up there. Rationality took over and said, no, Leo, Rex is your father, Annis is your mother, Bob and Jean your brothers, Faye is your sister. But I had that feeling that I have a family elsewhere. So if we look back at our history, either through the biblical history or through the scientific history or the lack of anthropological history, there are a variety of views claiming that we have ancestry that goes beyond planet Earth. Some people say we came from Mars into Atlantis, the masculine and militaristic part of us. Others say we came from Venus and feminine into Lemuria, and the Lemurian settled in the upper southern valley, and so that the Egyptian tradition had both the Mars and Venus, or Atlantean and Lemurian histories. Maybe someday when we talk to the ETs face to face, publicly, we can find out what they say about our history, or our histories, because some people said there was a blue race as well as a red, white, brown, and black race on the planet. The big question from my standpoint is, are these separate colonies from separate civilizations? Or was this an experiment to see whether we could all get along? Are we experiencing the kind of encounters that Kim Carlsberg talks about? I wrote a little blurb for that. And yeah, cosmic cousins. To what extent? I used to have this in another place. To what extent are the insectoids, reptilians, are they part of all of this? Or are we talking about humanoids, lizards, dragons, or the blonde and blue-eyed ETs? Someday perhaps we'll know how many of these various groups are working together as a team, or whether they are separate. And this is the big issue. I've worked with people for years who say, Leo, I was abducted. I'm not a damn contactee, I'm an abductee. And I say, okay. But some people I work with find out that in another lifetime they agreed to come to the planet. For example, this past spring, working with a young man from a military installation, he was told to talk to a psychologist about anger management. So as we talked, I said to him, well, you don't seem to be angry to me. Well, he said, I don't think of myself as an angry person. I just think I'm kind of impatient. I said, do you know what this impatience is about? He said, no. I said, let's do some hypnosis. So we practiced hypnosis, taught him self-hypnosis, gave him suggestions. It's what's called the affect bridge, where you go, you feel like you're moving out of the body, coming out of the chair, out of the room, without a building, and going to that place and time where something significant happened. So I gave him the suggestion to go to that time and that place where he could learn more about why he was impatient. He pictured himself as a crew member on a spacecraft. He was coming to Earth. The spacecraft crashes. Through a series of diplomatic and individual choices, he decided to stay as a human. But he said, these humans are so slow.
That would explain the impatience, right?
The impatience. Come on, get along, little dog. And so I don't know whether he tells his superior what happened or not, but he was in training to go to Afghanistan, and he'll have a different perspective of himself than he did beforehand. If we knew all about our history as a humanity, if we knew about our history as a person, as a human, and as ETs from other civilizations, the big question is, would we be more, well, no, the big question is energy technology. That's the big question. But the important question for many humans would be, would we be more self-loving, would we be more self-trusting, would we be more self-accepting if we knew that we had come from many different planets, many different civilizations. Right now, the big question is ET disclosure, extraterrestrial disclosure, and also energy technology, because that is, according to some people, is the big secret. If there is energy that's free, zero-point energy, get energy out of space, and enough for food, shelter, clothing, education, medical assistance for every man, woman, and child on the planet, then we don't need this patriarchal control system based on greed and scarcity to operate politically and socially. Then we could be work or not work. We could be poetic or not poetic, or whatever. It'd be a different world. And of course, that is so foreign to our patriarchal system that right now it's just not imaginable, and so the secret keepers just do not know how to release the secret.
Are we getting closer to a point where disclosure is going to happen?
Yeah. AD, after disclosure, Dolan and Zabel, they argue persuasively to me that not only is disclosure inevitable, but it's imminent. My guides tell me it's soon, 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 but I don't know what that means. I'm like a little kid at Christmas. My wife tells me, Leo, don't hold your breath. I said, I'm holding my breath and I'm hyperventilating at the same time. So, so the story I mentioned earlier, on December 3rd, 2012, I had the impression during the day that something unusual was going to happen. Nothing unusual happened at the office. Went home, looked at the mail, nothing unusual in the mail. So I thought, well, maybe my intuition was not correct. I talked to my sister by phone. It was her birthday. So I thought, okay, that's it. That was what was important. Meryl and I go to bed 8:30. We get up at 4:30. I do my stretches. And we go to the gym at 6. So I went to bed around 8:30. About an hour later, I woke up. I was still drowsy, but I heard a voice, not a voice in my ear, but in my mind. It was like my voice, but kind of like a little boy's voice. The golden age is soon. The golden age is coming. The golden age is soon. The golden age is coming. The golden age is soon. The golden age is coming. I thought, okay, I hear it. Well, then there was a lull. And then I heard that little voice say, the golden age is here. The golden age is now. The golden age is here. So the golden age is now. I looked over at the digital clock. It registered 10 p.m. I thought to myself, that's interesting. If it's 10 p.m. in Laramie, well then in New York City, it's 12 o'clock and moving from December 3rd to December 4th. So I asked myself, does that mean that December 4th, 2012 is the arrival of the Golden Age? I've looked for any kind of confirmation, talked to people, and I don't have any evidence or any testimony that would tell me anything happened right at that moment, but except my own experience. So I say to myself, okay, Leo's living in the golden age. And most people look at my bald head and say, yeah, you've been living in that golden age for some time.
Leo, the first time we spoke was back in about 1979, if you can believe that.
I'll trust you.
And I was around 19 years old at that time, and I remember coming down and visiting you, and we also, and then I also attended some of the conferences while I was going to school.
Oh, yes.
When I was working on my bachelor's degree, prior to going to law school, and the talk all along this period of time has been about disclosure. You know and I think some folks, I know like guys like Stephen Bassett would say that, oh yeah, I've got all these guys together. They're going to do it. They're going to talk about it. Would you agree with Dolan's assessment that it's not likely that the government will tell us anything? In other words, the president's not going to come out and say, guess what, we've got extraterrestrial visitors. It's more likely going to take place as the result of some massive WikiLeaks type of document dump, or as the result of a massive experience, some sort of an event that just cannot be denied.
I think you're right, and I agree with Dolan and Zabel. They have 8 or 9 steps, deathbed confessions, photographic evidence, less likely, moving on up to more likely reasons for disclosure. The the recent uproar over Snowden and Manning and others, in my view, is part of that concern about not national security, but concern about evidence that the extraterrestrial presence has been known for many years. It's not likely that a government official would be the release, although I admit to my bias of hoping that Carter and Obama would release information. Not only Stephen Bassett, but Dr. Sala and his group, and Dr. Stephen Greer and his group, Disclosure Project, have talked with officials, military, governmental officials, about disclosure. And the difficulties seem to be not fear among the population, not religious concerns. Those things have been used as potential explanations for why disclosure would be difficult. The big disclosure, I think, is the energy and the financial and political problems that would come with noticing that free energy is here, and it would upset our financial apple cart.